Ladies and gentlemen, she had nothing. I mean, nothing. No family left, no money, no direction. She was invisible to the world, but not to God. You see, sometimes God will let you hit rock bottom, not to break you, but to build you, to show you what you're made of. When everyone walked out, when the silence was louder than any crowd she ever knew, he was there. She didn't have the answer. She didn't have a plan, but she had faith. And that, my friends, is more powerful than $1 million in your pocket. Faith doesn't make things easy. It makes them possible. Yes. So even when she couldn't see the next step, she moved. Even when the tears wouldn't stop, she prayed. And even when nobody believed in her, she believed in him. Let me tell you something. Pain will teach you things success never will. Pain will humble you. Pain will shape your character, but prayer will change your life. She didn't pray for a miracle. She became one. Little by little, God began to move. Not on her schedule, but right on time. People came back. Opportunities showed up. Doors opened that had been closed for years. But more than that, she became someone new. She didn't just get back what she lost. She gained peace, purpose, and power. That's what God does. He doesn't just restore, he elevates. He takes the broken, the forgotten, the dismissed, and he says, watch what I can do. She went from nothing to everything, not because she had all the answers, but because she trusted the one who does. And if you're listening to this right now, maybe you've been there, maybe you're there now, and I want you to know your story isn't over. In fact, it might just be the beginning. God's not finished with you. Stand tall, walk forward, keep your faith, because he's still in the business of turning lives around. And yours might be next. There was a time in her life when silence became the loudest sound she knew. Not the peaceful kind of silence that comes at night when the world sleeps, but the silence that screams in your ears when no one calls, when the house is empty, when the prayers you whisper echo back at you unanswered. It didn't happen all at once. Life rarely falls apart in a single day. It crumbles slowly, piece by piece, until one day you look around and wonder how everything you built, everything you held close is gone. She remembered the laughter in the kitchen, the warmth of home, the scent of dinners cooked with love. All of it vanished. Her husband was gone, first emotionally, then physically. The love that once held their house together became resentment and then silence. Her children, grown and caught in their own storms, drifted farther with each phone call that went unanswered. Became strangers, not because they changed, but because she had nothing left to give. And people tend to disappear when you're no longer convenient to them. Hope used to live in her heart like a steady flame, but now it flickered so faintly she often questioned if it was still there. She had dreams once, simple ones, a steady home, a family, quiet joy, but those dreams felt childish now. She had no career to fall back on, no savings to soften the blow, and the world isn't kind to women it can't label: widow, worker, mother, wife. She no longer knew who she was, and even worse, she no longer believed that she mattered. Faith, that had become the hardest part. She had always believed in God, not loudly, not perfectly, but sincerely. Church on Sundays, prayers at night. She believed in doing good and helping others and forgiving even when it hurt. But faith is easy when life makes sense. It's easy to believe when the bills are paid and the house is full. But when you're hungry, when you're alone, when you've prayed for healing and watched the opposite happen, faith starts to feel like a cruel joke. She cried in her bedroom at night, tears soaking her pillow as she asked questions with no answers. Why me? What did I do wrong? Am I being punished? The silence after those questions was always the same. And so day by day, she stopped praying. Not out of anger, out of exhaustion. She was tired of waiting and tired of believing, tired of hoping. And yet something in her wouldn't quit. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the last embers of a faith too deep to die. She still got up every day. She still made her bed, took a shower, went for walks when she could. She still smiled at the cashier, still held the door for strangers. She still gave kindness even when she had none left for herself. Some might say that's weakness, being kind when the world is cruel. But maybe that's the bravest kind of strength. Time passed as it always does. The days didn't get easier, but she began to carry them differently. She stopped waiting for things to go back to how they were. She accepted that the old life was gone, that the people she loved might never return, and that the version of herself she once was would never exist again. There was grief in that acceptance, deep, quiet grief, But there was also freedom. With nothing left to lose, she began to live differently. She read books she never had time for. She walked barefoot in the grass just to remember what it felt like to be a child again. She sat in the quiet not to run from it, but to listen. And slowly, ever so slowly, something began to shift. It wasn't a dramatic moment. There were no voices from heaven, no miracles that made headlines. Just small things, a kind word from a stranger, a letter in the mail, a neighbor who knocked on her door to ask how she was doing. These things might seem insignificant, but to someone who has lost everything, they are lifelines. One evening, she found herself praying again. Not the desperate prayers of a woman trying to bargain with God, but a quiet, honest whisper. A thank you for the sunset, for the breath in her lungs, for the fact that she was still here. And in that moment, she realized something powerful. Maybe she hadn't lost her faith. Maybe it had been buried, bruised, and battered, but it was still there. With that realization came strength. She started volunteering at a shelter just once a week at first. She didn't talk about her own pain. She just listened to others. And in their stories, she saw herself. Broken people trying to keep going. Something in her lit up when she was helping them. Purpose. It had been missing for so long, she forgot what it felt like. Her world didn't change overnight. Her bank account was still empty. The calls from family were still rare. But her heart was different. She no longer woke up afraid of the day. She no longer looked at the mirror and saw a woman defined by her losses. She began to see a survivor. Someone who had walked through hell and didn't stay there. Someone who still had something to give. God hadn't abandoned her. He had been there all along, in the quiet, in the strangers, in the stillness. She realized that faith isn't always about getting what you pray for. Sometimes faith is about standing still when the storm is raging and saying, I don't know how, but I'll keep going. She had lost everything, but in the process, she found something no one could take. A deeper strength, a quieter joy, a real unshakable faith. Her story wasn't over. In fact, it was just getting started. There comes a point in life where everything else falls away. The titles, the relationships, the resources, the sense of control. You watch them one by one slip through your fingers like grains of sand. And when the dust settles, when you're left sitting in a room filled with silence and broken memories, you realize that all the things you once clung to were never really yours to hold. That was her reality. She had been stripped of it all. Everything she thought she needed to survive, to succeed, to feel loved, gone. But somewhere deep within the rubble, there was one thing still breathing, even if barely: faith. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't the kind of faith that others could see or applaud. It wasn't dressed in scripture quotes or long prayers, Sunday smiles. No, it was quiet, fragile, raw, the kind of faith that whispers, maybe, just maybe, there's still something left for me. That's all she had. Not a plan, not a promise. Just the tiniest belief that maybe she wasn't forgotten. Maybe God still saw her. She didn't have faith that everything would suddenly get better. That kind of faith had faded after disappointment carved its scars deep into her soul. What she had was something simpler. Faith that there was a reason she was still breathing. That even though the world had turned its back, God hadn't. That even in the dark, there was still a light somewhere. And if she kept walking, she might find it. She started doing things out of that tiny spark of belief. She got up in the morning, not because she felt strong, but because she believed strength might need her if she tried. She said, thank you for small things, a warm cup of tea, the sound of rain on the roof, a stranger's smile, because gratitude, she had learned, was the language of faith. She stopped trying to fix everything and started trusting that not everything needed to be fixed by her hands. That was faith too. Some days it felt ridiculous. Some days it felt like she was pretending, but she kept going. She remembered a time when she had it all, when faith was easy because life was good. But that kind of faith doesn't grow roots. It floats. The faith she had now was different. It had been tested, shaken, starved, but it was still alive. And that made it strong in a way nothing else could. God didn't need her to be perfect. He didn't need her to recite the right words or attend every service or prove herself worthy. He just needed her to believe that he was still in it, that her story still mattered, that even in her lowest moment, he was working behind the scenes, arranging things she couldn't yet see. There were moments when she felt his presence like a breeze, soft and sudden, impossible to explain. She'd be walking down the street, tears in her eyes, thinking she couldn't go another step. And someone would stop and say something kind, something small but specific, something that told her she wasn't invisible. She'd hear a song at the exact right moment, or a line in a book would hit her like a lightning bolt, reminding her that she was not alone in her pain. These weren't coincidences, they were echoes, gentle reminders that her faith, as small and fragile as it seemed, was not in vain. Faith doesn't always look like a bold declaration. Sometimes it looks like showing up, praying with trembling hands, smiling through pain, choosing love when bitterness would be easier, holding on when everything in you wants to let go. That's the kind of faith she lived with. That's the kind of faith God honors. She didn't realize it at the time, but each act of quiet faith was building something inside her. A new strength, a new identity, not based on what she had lost or what she feared, but on who she was becoming. Her faith began to reshape her thoughts. She no longer saw herself as abandoned but chosen, not as defeated but as prepared, not as broken but as being rebuilt. All through faith, she began to pray again, not the rehearsed prayers, but the real ones. Honest, sometimes angry, sometimes tearful, sometimes silent, but real. And in that honesty, she found peace. She stopped trying to impress God and started simply talking to him like a daughter talks to a father. That changed everything. Faith gave her courage to dream again, not in the same way she used to. These weren't childish fantasies of a perfect life. These were deeper dreams, dreams of healing, of meaning, of helping others rise from their ashes the way she was learning to rise from hers. Her faith, once just enough to get her through the day, became fuel for something bigger. God didn't wait until she was whole to start blessing her. He met her in her brokenness. That's what amazed her most. He didn't require her to be fixed before he moved. He just needed her faith. Because faith, even in its smallest form, makes room for miracles. And the miracle she received wasn't just that things got better. It was that she got better, that she became someone stronger, wiser, more compassionate. The woman who once barely believed she could survive was now becoming a source of strength for others. She began to see how the very thing that almost destroyed her became the soil where her purpose was planted. That's what faith does. It transforms what was meant to break you into what builds you. And all God needed was for her to trust him just enough to keep walking. She never forgot where she came from. She still had scars, still had quiet nights where the memories echoed. But she no longer saw them as signs of weakness. They were proof of God's faithfulness, proof that faith, however small, can move mountains. That faith, when placed in the right hands, can rebuild a life from the ground up. She didn't have much when she started, just that little ember of belief. But God took that and did what only he can do. He breathed on it. He fanned it into flame. And what once felt like the end became the foundation for a new beginning, all because she held on to the one thing no one could take, her faith. She didn't ask for the pain. No one does. It came suddenly at first like a wave that knocked her off her feet. Then it stayed, settling in her bones, showing up in her chest at night, and whispering to her in the quiet moments when she was alone. She had lost things that most people don't talk about. The kind of losses that don't make headlines but leave cracks in the soul. Relationships ended. Dreams died. Her sense of identity unraveled. It felt like life was peeling back every layer of comfort, exposing the parts of her she didn't even know were fragile. At first, she resisted it. She fought against the pain like a storm, begging it to leave, bargaining with life to bring back what she had lost. She tried to numb it, distract herself, keep moving fast enough so it couldn't catch her. But pain is patient. It doesn't rush, it waits. And when the noise around her finally quieted, it met her face to face. It was then that she realized something unsettling. Pain wasn't leaving. Not on her timeline, not on her terms. So she did the only thing left. She sat with it, she let it speak, and it had a lot to say. Pain showed her the truth about herself. Not the version she posted online or showed to the world, but the one she kept hidden. Pain pointed out the wounds she had ignored for years, the places she gave too much, the parts where she let others define her worth, the walls she built to survive that also kept love out. It wasn't cool. It was honest. Pain didn't mock her. It mirrored her. It became a teacher not by giving easy answers, but by asking the hard questions. Who are you without the applause? What do you believe when the blessing hasn't come? Do you still see value in yourself when others don't? And slowly, pain reshaped her. It broke her pride, but it built her character. It stripped her of shallow strength, but taught her endurance. She no longer needed to pretend everything was okay because she learned that truth was more powerful than appearance. Pain taught her empathy because now when she saw someone else crying, she didn't offer cliches, she offered presence. She knew what it was like to sit in the dark, and that changed how she showed up for others. But pain alone could not carry her. It taught her, yes, but it was prayer that gave her power. Not the kind of prayer she used to say before meals or in church pews out of routine. This was something deeper. It came from the pit of her stomach, from the cracks in her voice, from the broken places that words alone couldn't reach. Her prayers weren't always poetic. Sometimes they were messy. Sometimes they were just tears, but they were real. At first, prayer was just survival, a lifeline, a cry into the night when she didn't think she could face another day. But something happened in that sacred space. She began to feel something shift. Prayer didn't always change her circumstances, but it changed her. It gave her clarity when confusion clouded everything. It brought peace, not because the storm ended, but because she realized she wasn't facing it alone. Prayer gave her strength that couldn't be explained. There were days she should have crumbled, days when everything in her said, stay down, but something stronger said, hey, get up. That was prayer working. It was like an anchor. Life tried to drag her under, but she kept rising, not because she was fearless, but because she was connected to something bigger than fear. Prayer reminded her of who she was. When the world tried to define her by failure or heartbreak, prayer reminded her she was more than her mistakes, more than her past. It whispered identity into her soul. Beloved, chosen, still worthy, still called. And over time, the pain that once felt unbearable became the platform for her greatest growth. She no longer ran from it. She let it refine her, but she never walked through it alone. Prayer was the companion that never left. When friends faded, when even her own voice grew quiet, God was still listening. She didn't need to impress him. She didn't need the right words. Just honesty, just openness. Sometimes she sat in silence, and that was enough. Because prayer isn't always about speaking. It's about connection. It's about presence. And in that presence, she found power. Not the kind of power that demands or controls, a quiet power. The kind that helps you keep going when nothing makes sense. The kind that holds you up when grief knocks you down. The kind that allows you to love again, to forgive again, to believe again. Her story didn't change overnight. There were still days when the pain returned like an old echo. She wasn't the same woman anymore. Pain had taught her and prayer had transformed her. What used to break her now built her. What used to feel like the end now felt like a beginning. And though others might have seen her as someone who lost, she knew the truth. She had gained something far more valuable. A depth of faith, a strength of spirit, a peace that didn't depend on circumstances. Pain became her teacher, and prayer became her power. And that combination turned her into someone unshakable. There was a time when she thought her best days were behind her. She had counted herself out, convinced that too much had been taken, that her heart had endured more than it could handle. Life had not been gentle. It had stormed through her world, stripping away the people she loved, the stability she clung to, and the future she once imagined so clearly. It all disappeared like smoke in the wind. Left behind was a woman barely able to recognize herself in the mirror, a shell of someone who used to believe. Loss had etched itself into her soul. At first, she tried to rebuild with her own hands, piecing together fragments of what once was. But every time she thought she was making progress, life knocked it back down. Friends she trusted walked away when she needed them most. Financial struggles pulled the rug from beneath her feet. And loneliness, the kind that settles in your bones, became a companion she could never quite shake. It seemed unfair. She had done her best. She had loved deeply, given sacrificially, prayed sincerely. And yet all of it was met with silence, with pain. There were nights she cried herself to sleep, and mornings she dreaded waking up. She didn't ask for extravagance, only for peace. But even that felt like too much to hope for. Still, even in the ruin, she refused to give up completely. Something in her, a flicker, a whisper, a holy defiance, wouldn't let her quit. She started to talk to God again, not with polished words or religious formality, but with raw honesty. If you're still there, she would whisper, I need you. I can't do this without you. What she didn't know was that God had never left. He had seen every tear, heard every silent prayer, caught every piece of her broken heart. He wasn't just watching. He was working behind the scenes in the places she couldn't see. He was weaving purpose into her pain, preparing blessings that would one day make sense of the loss. It started small. A job opportunity she didn't expect, a reconnection with someone from her past who genuinely cared. Doors that had been shut for years began to creak open, not because she forced them wide. Where there was once emptiness, now there were signs of life. Where her heart had been hard from heartbreak, it began to soften again, to believe again. She began to feel joy return, not the shallow, fleeting kind, but deep-rooted joy. The kind that doesn't depend on circumstances, the kind that can only come from healing, and with it came clarity. She began to understand that what she thought was the end was really just the middle of the story. God wasn't finished. He was just getting started. Relationships began to form, not just any relationships, but ones with depth and authenticity. People entered her life who saw her, valued her, and didn't run when things got real. She no longer had to perform or pretend. She was loved as she was, not for what she could offer. That kind of love was foreign to her, but it became the new standard. God wasn't just giving her replacements for what she had lost. He was giving her better. Her dreams began to awaken too. Dreams she had shelved long ago because they felt impossible or unworthy. Passions she had buried under responsibility and survival began to resurface. She started writing again, painting again, speaking again. Her voice, once silenced by fear and shame, became bold with truth. She had something to say, and people were listening. Opportunities came, not because she chased them, but because they were drawn to the light she had become. The very pain that once crippled her now gave her credibility. People didn't want perfection. They wanted real, and she was real. Her story, raw and honest, began to touch others, inspire others, and breathe hope into those still in their own seasons of loss. Financial doors opened in unexpected ways. She had lived for so long in lack, constantly worrying about the next bill or whether she could make it through another month. But suddenly, she had more than enough. Not because she struck gold, but because God provided in ways she never anticipated. Through opportunities, favor, and divine connections. She didn't just recover financially, she began to thrive. And with that blessing came the chance to bless others. The more she gave, the more she received. It became a rhythm, generosity and gratitude flowing hand in hand. She supported others walking through pain, not as a savior, but as a witness. I've been there, she would say, and I promise it doesn't end here. God's restoration wasn't about replacing what was lost with replicas. It was about redemption, taking the shattered pieces and creating something entirely new, something stronger, more beautiful, more purposeful than she had ever imagined. She had prayed for restoration, but God gave her abundance. She had asked for healing, but he gave her wholeness. She wanted a second chance, but he gave her a brand new life. She found peace that surpassed understanding, not because everything made sense, but because she no longer needed it to. She trusted him. And in that trust, there was freedom. No more striving, no more fear. No more clinging to what wasn't meant for her. She had learned to live open-handed, knowing that anything God removed, he did so only to make space for something greater. The girl who once thought her life was over now woke up each day with expectancy. Not because everything was perfect, but because she knew who was writing her story. God didn't just restore what she lost. He gave her more than she ever dreamed. More peace, more joy, more love, more purpose, more of him. And with each new blessing, she didn't forget where she came from. She carried her past not as a weight, but as a witness. Proof that nothing is too broken for God to redeem. Her scars weren't signs of shame. They were signs of survival. And every step she took forward was a declaration. That restoration is real, that God keeps his promises, and that no matter how far you've fallen, he can take you higher than you ever imagined. Her story is living proof that no loss is final when God is involved. What was once broken beyond recognition became the foundation for something stronger, something sacred. She walked through darkness, but she did not walk alone. Pain taught her, prayer empowered her, and faith sustained her. And in return, God didn't just give back what she had lost. He gave her more than she ever dared to dream. Hoping to everything was not about material gain, but about becoming the woman she was always meant to be, whole, restored, and unstoppable. Her life stands as a reminder that when God writes your story, even the most painful chapters have purpose, and the ending is always redemption.